The night a poor orphan was forced out of her home, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a mysterious necklace. She thought her life was over, but just minutes later, she would meet a handsome billionaire who would change her life forever. Evelyn Harper had already lost her parents, and the family who adopted her had just slammed the door in her face. Alone on the street, she was just another poor orphan with nowhere to go. But fate had other plans. A sleek black car suddenly stopped beside her. Inside it sat Alexander Laurent, a powerful, handsome billionaire who never noticed strangers. But something about this lonely girl made him step out of the car. Neither of them knew that this single meeting would uncover secrets from Evelyn's past, secrets powerful enough to change both of their lives forever. But why did the billionaire suddenly freeze when he saw the necklace around the poor orphan's neck? And why had the family who raised her suddenly forced her out of their home that very night? The sunlight that morning years earlier spilled gently through the kitchen window of a modest apartment in Boston, casting warm golden lines across the wooden table where 7-year-old Evelyn Harper sat swinging her legs. Her father, Daniel Harper, stood behind her with the intense focus of a surgeon attempting something far more complicated than medicine. Her hair, Dad, Evelyn said between giggles. You're doing it wrong again. Daniel narrowed his eyes at the braid forming clumsily between his fingers. I perform delicate surgical stitching, he said seriously. Braiding hair should not be harder than saving a life. From the doorway, Rachel Harper laughed softly. She was already dressed in her pale blue hospital scrubs, her dark hair tied neatly. A stack of research folders tucked under one arm. You're tying it like you're closing a wound, she teased. Daniel shrugged. Precision matters. Evelyn twisted around to look at the braid dot. It was an even dot, very uneven. She burst into laughter. Rachel stepped forward and gently fixed the braid in seconds. There, she said. Now she looks like a normal child. Daniel lifted his hands defensively. Critics everywhere. But beneath the laughter, something unusual rested on the kitchen table. Documents filled with medical diagrams, handwritten notes, and complicated engineering sketches. Years later, those papers would become the center of a mystery powerful enough to change Evelyn's life. At that moment, however, they were simply part of her parents' dream. Daniel noticed Evelyn staring at the pages. One day, he said, kneeling beside her, this system is going to help hospitals treat patients who can't afford expensive machines. Rachel leaned against the counter, her voice softer now. It could save thousands of lives. What Evelyn didn't know was that their research had already drawn attention from powerful investors and dangerous enemies. In quiet boardrooms across the city, men with enormous wealth were already arguing over the project. Some wanted to fund it, others wanted it buried. Rachel quickly closed the folder, as if sealing away the tension that followed the project everywhere. Work later, she said firmly. Family first. Daniel smiled. Always. Before leaving for work, he reached into his coat pocket. Wait, he said. Evelyn looked up. Daniel held out a delicate silver necklace. A small pendant hung from the chain, engraved with a single elegant letter, L. Rachel raised her eyebrows slightly. You're giving it to her now? Daniel nodded slowly. She should have it. He knelt down and placed the necklace around Evelyn's neck. The metal felt cool against her skin. What does the L mean? She asked curiously. Daniel hesitated just long enough for Rachel to notice. It stands for something important, he said carefully. Something connected to our work. Rachel studied the necklace quietly, her expression thoughtful. Maybe one day she understand, she murmured. Daniel gently squeezed Evelyn's shoulder. Until then, keep it safe. Evelyn smiled, touching the pendant. I will. Before leaving, Daniel paused at the door and looked back at his daughter. There was something in his expression, something protective, almost worried. He crouched beside her again. Whatever happens, Evelyn, you must always be brave. She rolled her eyes playfully. Nothing is going to happen, Rachel. And Daniel exchanged a glance, a silent one, the kind adults share when they know something a child cannot yet understand. Later that evening, their car drove along a quiet highway outside the city. Rachel leaned back in the passenger seat, tired but content. After we finish the next prototype, she said, we should finally take that vacation Evelyn keeps asking about. Daniel smiled. She wants to see the ocean. Behind them, another vehicle followed. At first it looked like any other car, but it stayed exactly the same distance behind them for miles. To precise. To patient. Inside their car, Rachel laughed at something Daniel said. Neither of them noticed the headlights closing in. At home, Evelyn sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring a picture of her family. She had drawn 3 smiling figures holding hands. The necklace rested against her chest as she waited for the sound of the front door opening. But hours passed. Then, the phone rang, a sound that would split her childhood into 2 halves. Before. And after. Far across the city, in a tall glass office tower owned by the powerful Lawrence Corporation, a young boy named Alexander Lawrence sat quietly in his father's office. He was only 10 years old then. On the desk beside him, a project file his father had been reviewing earlier. The front page displayed a small symbol, silver pendant engraved with the letter L. Alexander picked it up. Curiously, Dad, he asked, what does this mean? His father glanced at the file briefly. That, he said thoughtfully, belongs to 2 brilliant people who are trying to change the world. Alexander studied the symbol carefully. Years later, when he saw that same pendant around the neck of a frightened orphan standing under a streetlight, he would remember this moment instantly and realize her story was never just an accident. The next morning, after the devastating phone call that shattered her childhood, -1-year-old Evelyn Harper sat quietly in the back seat of a social worker's car, her small hands tightly gripping the silver necklace resting against her chest as the city of Boston moved past the window and a blur of buildings and unfamiliar streets. The adults in the front seat spoke in soft voices, but Evelyn barely heard them because the words from the hospital the night before still echoed in her mind. There was an accident. We're very sorry. Words that had taken both of her parents away in a single moment. When the car finally stopped in front of a large brick building surrounded by a tall iron fence, the social worker gently opened the door and knelt beside her, speaking softly. This is the Harper Children's Home, Evelyn. You'll stay here for a while until we find the right family for you. But Evelyn didn't answer as she stepped out slowly, clutching her small backpack, the same one she had packed for school the day before, when her world had still been normal. Inside the orphanage, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old books, and the hallway walls were covered with faded drawings from other children who had once waited here for families that might never come. The caretaker, Mrs. Caldwell, a stern but tired woman who had watched hundreds of children arrive with the same lost expression, looked down at Evelyn kindly and asked, "Do you have any belongings we should log?" So Evelyn silently handed over her backpack, while the caretaker carefully placed 3 items on the desk: a photograph of her parents, smiling beside a hospital building, a worn storybook, and the delicate silver necklace with the engraved letter L. Mrs. Caldwell paused when she saw the pendant, turning it in the light with curiosity before asking, "Do you know what this stands for, sweetheart?" But Evelyn shook her head softly, remembering only that her father had said it was important, something connected to their work, words that now felt like pieces of a puzzle she was too young to solve. Days inside the orphanage turned into months, and Evelyn quickly learned how the quiet system worked: the hopeful smiles when visitors arrived, the silent disappointment when they chose another child instead. But even among the other children she seemed different, often sitting alone by the window reading old books far beyond her age, a habit that came from years of listening to her parents discuss medicine and research at the dinner table. Sometimes she would touch the necklace thoughtfully, unaware that across the city powerful business figures were still quietly discussing the research project her parents had left behind. And even further away, in a towering glass office belonging to the wealthy Lawrence Corporation, a young heir, Alexander Lawrence, occasionally overheard his father mention the Harper project with a tone of frustration and respect. Then one afternoon, Nearly 3 years after Evelyn first entered the orphanage, a luxury car stopped outside the gates, and a well-dressed couple stepped out. Michael and Laura Bennett, whose polished smiles suggested generosity, but whose quiet whispers in the hallway hinted at motives that had nothing to do with love. When Laura first saw Evelyn sitting by the window reading silently, she leaned toward her husband and murmured thoughtfully, "That one looks calm and intelligent," and Michael replied in a low voice that carried just enough calculation to foreshadow the future, "Yes, she might be exactly what we need." While across the room, Evelyn looked up slowly, unaware that this moment would pull her into a home that would eventually break her heart and push her back onto the streets where fate, years later, would finally bring her face to face with the handsome billionaire who would change her life forever. The day Evelyn Harper left the orphanage, she believed her life was finally beginning again. The polished black car waiting outside the gates looked impossibly luxurious compared to anything she had ever known, and as Michael Bennett opened the door with a smooth, reassuring smile, he said warmly, "Welcome to your new home, Evelyn," while his wife Laura Bennett adjusted her sunglasses and studied the girl with a quiet, measuring look that Evelyn was too young to understand. The drive through the quiet neighborhoods of Boston felt like entering another world, with wide tree-lined streets, tall iron gates, and elegant houses that seemed pulled from magazines. And when the car finally turned into a long driveway leading to a white 3-story mansion, surrounded by manicured gardens, Evelyn's breath caught in amazement, because she had never imagined a place like this could become her home. Inside, the Bennett residence gleamed with polished marble floors, tall windows, and expensive artwork, and Laura gestured lightly toward the staircase saying, "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," her tone polite but distant, as though she was speaking to a guest rather than a daughter. Evelyn walked slowly through the hallways carrying her small bag, her fingers brushing the silver necklace with the engraved letter L, the one thing she had kept since her parents died, while memories flickered through her mind of her father placing it around her neck and saying it was important, a moment that now felt like a whisper from another life. The first weeks with the Bennetts felt like a dream. New clothes appeared in her closet, a private tutor came twice a week, and Michael occasionally asked about her schoolwork with a friendly interest. But even during those early days, small details quietly hinted that something beneath the surface was not quite right. Sometimes Evelyn would notice Laura watching her with a strange curiosity, especially when the necklace caught the light. And once during dinner Laura asked casually, "Your parents were nurses, correct?" Evelyn nodded and answered softly, "Yes, they worked on something important together," and Laura exchanged a quick glance with Michael before changing the subject to quickly. Late at night, when the house grew silent, Evelyn sometimes heard the Bennetts speaking behind closed doors, their voices low but tense, fragments of sentences drifting down the hallway like pieces of a puzzle. She could not yet assemble words like research, documents, and inheritance appearing again and again. Years passed, and Evelyn grew from a quiet 10-year-old into a thoughtful teenager who spent most of her time studying or reading in the large library, while Michael Bennett's business empire quietly expanded through real estate and corporate investments, his wealth allowing the family to maintain their image, generous philanthropists in Boston society. Yet beneath that reputation, he had always been a careful strategist who saw opportunity where others saw sentiment. One evening during a charity dinner hosted in their mansion, Evelyn overheard two of Michael's business associates discussing a mysterious medical project that had disappeared years earlier after a tragic accident involving two researchers named Harper. And when she heard her own last name spoken by strangers, a strange chill ran down her spine, if an invisible thread from her past had suddenly tightened. Later that night, she asked Laura cautiously, "Did my parents ever work with people in business?" But Laura simply smiled faintly and replied, "Sweetheart, some questions about the past are better left alone," words that sounded gentle yet carried a subtle warning. As Evelyn returned to her room, the necklace resting against her chest seemed heavier somehow, as if it carried a story no one around her wanted to explain. And downstairs, Michael Bennett stood by his office window studying a thin file hidden inside his desk drawer labeled with a single name, Harper, while murmuring quietly to himself, "If the rumors about the inheritance are true, keeping her here, it'd still be worth it." Unaware that the girl sleeping upstairs would one day learn the truth about why she had really been brought into their home. A truth that would eventually drive her back onto the streets, where destiny was already preparing the moment she would meet the handsome billionaire who would change her life forever. Years passed quietly inside the Bennett mansion, but the warmth Evelyn once believed was real slowly faded into something colder, something harder to explain. By the time she turned 16, the grand house in the wealthy suburbs of Boston felt less like a home and more like a place where she simply existed, moving silently through polished hallways, while Michael and Laura Bennett lived their busy lives surrounded by business partners, charity events, and private meetings that never included her. Evelyn had grown into a thoughtful and intelligent young woman, excelling at school and spending most evenings in the mansion's quiet library, where she read medical textbooks and science articles that strangely reminded her of the conversations her parents used to have at the dinner table long ago, though those memories now felt like fragments of a dream. The silver necklace with the engraved letter L never left her neck, and sometimes she would turn the pendants between her fingers while studying, wondering again what her father had meant when he said it was important. One evening the mansion was unusually quiet after a long charity gala hosted by the Bennetts, and Evelyn walked downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water, unaware that a conversation unfolding in the living room was about to reveal the truth she had unknowingly lived beside for years. As she approached the hallway, she heard Laura's voice, sharp and irritated, saying, "This has gone on long enough, Michael," which made Evelyn pause instinctively, because Laura rarely sounded so tense. Michael's reply came in a calm but calculating tone. "We needed time to confirm the rumors," and Laura scoffed softly before continuing. "Rumors that never turned into anything useful," the words hanging in the air with a bitterness that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She remained hidden just behind the wall as the conversation continued, her heart beginning to race as pieces of meaning slowly formed. "When we adopted her," Laura said quietly, "you were convinced the girl would lead us to the Harper inheritance." And Michael sighed heavily before answering. The medical research project her parents were working on was rumored to be worth millions once completed, and investors connected to the project disappeared after their accident. He paused briefly before adding, "I thought keeping the daughter close might reveal something eventually." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as the truth struck her with a force she had never expected. The realization that her adoption might never have been about kindness at all. Laura continued speaking with open frustration. "Well, she hasn't revealed anything, Michael, and now she's almost an adult," while Michael responded with a colder practicality that Evelyn had never heard before. "Then perhaps it's time to stop pretending this arrangement is permanent." The hallway suddenly felt too small as Evelyn backed away quietly, her mind spinning with disbelief and heartbreak. Flashbacks of the last 6 years, replaying differently now, Laura's curious looks whenever the necklace appeared, Michael's occasional questions about her parents, the business associates whispering about the Harper research project during parties. Upstairs in her room, she sat on the edge of her bed staring at the pendant in her palm, the letter L glinting under the lamplight as if it held answers no one had ever explained. And for the first time she wondered whether her parents' accident had truly been just an accident at all. Downstairs, Michael Bennett closed the living room curtains and locked the drawer containing the Harper file, unaware that the girl he believed knew nothing had just overheard enough to change how she saw her entire life. A discovery that quietly set the stage for the cruel decision the Bennetts would soon make, a decision that would force Evelyn out of their home and unknowingly push her toward the one meeting that would alter her destiny forever. The night Evelyn Harper turned 17, the Bennett mansion felt colder than it ever had, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. She had grown tall and poised, her intelligence and quiet strength visible in the careful way she carried herself. but nothing could protect her from the storm she sensed brewing in the shadows of the house she had once believed was her home. Earlier that evening, she had tried to engage Laura at dinner, asking casually about school programs, hoping for a spark of warmth, but Laura's eyes had barely met hers before she replied flatly, "You'll manage," her tone polite yet cutting, and Michael sat silently beside her, scrolling through his phone with occasional glances that held neither affection or curiosity. After the meal, Evelyn retreated to her room, clutching the silver necklace with the engraved letter L, her fingers tracing the delicate curves as she remembered her parents' words from so many years ago. Keep it safe and be brave, a mantra she had lived by ever since. And tonight it felt heavier than ever, weighted with the knowledge she had overheard about the Bennetts' true motives. A soft knock at her door startled her, and when she opened it, Laura stood there, arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. "Pack your things," Laura said quietly, as if it were an ordinary request, and Evelyn froze, her pulse racing as confusion and disbelief collided inside her. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Michael's voice came from the doorway behind Laura, calm but final. "You're old enough now. You can figure out your own life." And Evelyn realized with a jolt that the home she had called her own for nearly 7 years was no longer hers at all. She gathered her small suitcase mechanically, her mind replaying every moment that now seemed like a lie: the tutoring sessions, the generous gifts, the polite smiles that masked calculation, the quiet questions about her parents, and the glances that lingered too long on her necklace. As she stepped out into the cold night air, the mansion looming silently behind her, memories of the orphanage resurfaced: the sterile walls, Mrs. Caldwell's gentle voice, the way she had once clutched her small backpack and wondered if anyone would ever care, memories she had thought long behind her, now mixing with the bitter taste of betrayal. She walked down the long driveway, suitcase in hand, the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to echo the uncertainty of her future. And as she paused at the edge of the property, a sleek black car rolled quietly past, its windows dark and reflective, oblivious to the small figure standing alone on the curb. Tears threatened, but Evelyn swallowed them, clutching the necklace tighter, repeating silently the words that had carried her this far: "Be brave, Evelyn, be brave." And in that instant, without knowing it, she stepped into a world where the lonely, frightened poor orphan forced out of her home would soon encounter a man whose wealth, influence, and unexpected compassion would alter the course of her life forever. And as she walked into the unknown night, questions swirled in her mind. Why had the Bennetts cast her aside after so many years? What secret in her parents' past had drawn them to her? And who, if anyone, could see the value in a girl whose life had been marked by loss, loneliness, and a mysterious necklace that might hold the key to everything she was about to discover? Evelyn Harper walked along the dimly lit street, the weight of her small suitcase a constant reminder that she had nothing left. Not even the warmth of the home had been forced to leave. The silver necklace around her neck seemed heavier tonight, glinting faintly under the pale streetlights, as if urging her to hold on to the one connection she still had to her parents, a connection whose meaning she barely understood. The city around her was quiet, the usual hum of traffic and late-night pedestrians replaced by an eerie stillness that mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. And she wondered if anyone would ever notice a lone girl wandering through the streets, her small figure swallowed by shadows. Then, as if the universe had been waiting, a sleek black car slowed to a stop beside her, the engine's low purr breaking the silence. And for the first time in hours, Evelyn's heart skipped, unsure whether fear or a hope had stirred within her. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man whose presence seemed to fill the street, tall and impeccably dressed, with eyes that were sharp, calculating, yet curious. Alexander Laurent, a young, handsome billionaire whose life was defined by wealth, influence, and control, yet who had never been touched by something so fragile, so raw, as the girl standing before him. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding attention. And Evelyn's lips trembled, as she shook her head, unable to form words, her mind racing with disbelief that someone could stop and ask, genuinely, about her well-being. Alexander studied her carefully, noticing the worn suitcase, the thin jacket, the slight tremble in her hands. And then his gaze fell to the necklace around her neck, the silver pendant with the letter L, one he had seen before at his father's files and sketches, a detail that triggered a memory of long-ago conversations about a mysterious Harper medical project, and suddenly a spark of recognition flickered in his mind. "Come," he said gently, stepping out of the car. "You shouldn't be out here alone." And Evelyn hesitated, instincts warning her to run. Yet some deep part of her, the part that remembered her parents' words, "Keep it safe, be brave," pushed her to trust this stranger, at least for a moment. As she slid into the passenger seat, the car's warmth and quiet luxury surrounding her, flashes of her past played in rapid succession. The laughter of her parents at breakfast, the cold indifference of the Bennets, the loneliness of the orphanage, each memory layering upon the next, heavy with emotion and unanswered questions. Alexander glanced at her profile, noticing the way her fingers traced the necklace unconsciously, a small but telling sign of attachment, and he wondered silently what secrets this poor orphan, forced out of her home, might carry, how her story intertwined with his father's past projects, and whether this encounter was chance or destiny. Neither spoke much during the drive, the silence thick but not uncomfortable, each lost in thought, the city passing like a blur outside the tinted windows, while inside, the first fragile thread of connection formed between a girl whose life had been defined by loss and a billionaire whose curiosity had just been piqued, both unaware that this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would reveal hidden truths, long-buried secrets, and a destiny neither could yet comprehend. As the days passed after that first encounter, Alexander Laurent could not stop thinking about the girl who had appeared on that quiet street, the poor orphan forced out of her home with nothing but a suitcase and a mysterious silver necklace. Back in his penthouse office, atop the Laurent Corporation Tower in Boston, he pored over old files and photographs, tracing the Harper name, the sketches of medical devices, and notes his father had kept hidden away for years, each page igniting a memory of the necklace's distinctive Ella detail that connected Evelyn to a past he had only glimpsed in fragments as a child. Alexander's assistant, a sharp young woman named Clara, noticed his focus and asked cautiously, "Sir, this Harper project, why does it matter so much now?" Alexander's gaze remained fixed on a faded photograph of a hospital wing where Daniel and Rachel Harper had once worked, and he replied quietly, "Because the girl I met on the street wears the same necklace from these files, and something tells me it is the key to more than just old research," his voice heavy with the weight of both curiosity and caution. Later that night, Evelyn sat alone in her small apartment, the city lights filtering through the blinds, the silver necklace glinting under the lamp as she ran her fingers over it, memories of her parents' words, "Keep it safe, be brave," echoing like a mantra, and she remembered flashes from childhood she hadn't thought about in years, her father showing her early prototypes of medical devices, her mother whispering about investors who seemed overly interested in their work, and a shadowy feeling that someone had always been watching, just out of sight. That night, Alexander drove back to the street where he had first seen her, trying to piece together the threads, the adoption by the Bennets, the mysterious expulsion, the rumors of missing research, and the girl's quiet intelligence that had shown through even on that first brief encounter. He recalled subtle details he had noticed that night, the way she had flinched at sudden movements, the meticulous care with which she held the necklace, the slight hesitation in her eyes when she spoke of her parents, all clues that suggested a depth of experience far beyond her years. Meanwhile, Evelyn, unaware that someone was actively searching for the truth about her past, found herself revisiting old memories from the Bennett mansion. The way Laura would glance at her during lessons, the quiet discussions Michael held in his office behind closed doors, the whispers of Harper's research that drifted down the hall during charity dinners. The more she remembered, the more questions formed, each one a small spark of suspicion. Why had the Bennets kept her close 4 years, only to cast her out? What secrets had her parents died protecting? And why did the silver pendant feel as though it were calling her towards something greater? Alexander, piecing together documents, photographs, and old letters, began to see a narrative forming, one that connected the orphaned girl, her parents' research, and a hidden network of people who had once sought the Harper's project with greed and ambition. And he realized that this was not just a coincidence, that Evelyn was somehow the missing piece in a puzzle that had been decades in the making. As the night deepened, Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze fixed on the glowing city below, the faint glint of the silver pendant from that first night flashing in his mind. And he whispered to himself, "I will find out who you really are, and why your life was taken from you," unaware that Evelyn, miles away, was already preparing for the first steps of a journey that would bring them together and reveal the hidden truths of her parents, the Bennets, and the mysterious power behind the necklace that had always belonged to her. Evelyn Harper had spent the first weeks after leaving the Bennet mansion wandering between cheap motels, libraries, and small cafes, surviving on part-time jobs and the small savings she had managed to keep from the Bennets' generosity. But every night her thoughts circled back to the silver necklace around her neck and the unanswered questions that clung to her past like shadows. She had grown wary of strangers, learned quickly how to protect herself, and yet, despite all her caution, a small part of her still longed for someone who could see her for more than just an orphan or a pawn in someone else's scheme. One rainy evening, while she sat tucked in a quiet corner of a cafe, Alexander Lawrence appeared, slipping through the door as if the storm outside could not touch him, his tall frame and impeccable suit contrasting sharply with the soaked streets and Evelyn's worn coat. "Evelyn Harper," he asked softly, his voice calm but holding authority, and she looked up, startled, instinctively clutching the pendant. Who are you?" she whispered, eyes wide with suspicion. He smiled faintly, not offering a full answer. "Someone who knows about your parents, and about you," and he slid a small folder across the table, careful to avoid alarming her, containing old photographs, research notes, and news clippings tied to the Harper medical project, all of which immediately drew her curiosity, despite the lingering fear in her chest. As Evelyn flipped through the pages, flashes of memory came and bidden the laughter of her parents in their cramped apartment, the late nights filled with diagrams and prototypes, the tense conversations she had overheard at the Bennet mansion, the casual, calculated comments about the Harper inheritance, and suddenly, everything she had experienced for the past decade felt connected, as though pieces of a puzzle long hidden were finally beginning to fall into place. Alexander watched her carefully, noting the way her fingers lingered on the photographs, the thoughtful furrow of her brow, and the flicker of hope mixed with hesitation in her eyes, understanding that trust would not come easily to a girl who had been used and abandoned, yet feeling that the urgency of revealing the truth outweighed patience. "Why are you showing me this?" Evelyn finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why now?" Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious but gentle. "Because it's time you knew the truth about your parents, about the people who adopted you, and about why your life was turned upside down, and because you're the only one who can finish what they started." His words carried weight, threading curiosity and suspense into every syllable, planting questions in Evelyn's mind that demanded answers. Over the next hours, Alexander revealed small fragments of a shadowy network that had once tried to control the Harper project, investors who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the importance of the silver pendant she had carried all her life while deliberately leaving gaps that kept her wondering, forcing her mind to race with possibilities, connecting her past and present in ways she had never imagined. Evelyn listened, absorbed, and slowly the tension in her body eased just enough to allow a fragile trust to form, a sense that this handsome billionaire had only been a lie, but a guide into the very truth she had been denied for so long. And as the rain continued to tap against the windows, a spark of hope ignited within her, setting the stage for a journey of discovery, danger, and the ultimate revelation that her destiny was far greater than she had ever imagined. The days that followed were tense and electric, as Evelyn Harper and Alexander Laurent worked side by side to uncover the secrets buried in her parents' past. The silver necklace with the engraved L, or a constant reminder of the connection between her lost childhood and the dangerous truths waiting to be revealed. In the quiet of Alexander's private study in the Laurent Corporation Tower, stacks of old files, faded photographs, and yellowed notebooks littered the polished mahogany desk, each document a breadcrumb leading to the shadowy network that had once targeted Daniel and Rachel Harper. And Alexander explained carefully, "These people are still out there, Evelyn. They want what your parents discovered, and they might come after you too." His tone steady but firm, a subtle warning buried within concern. Evelyn, staring at a scanned photograph of her father standing beside a prototype medical device, clenched the necklace tightly, flashes of memory weaving through her mind. Daniel explaining the mechanism to her with childlike patience, Rachel whispering about cautious investors, and the hushed conversations at the Bennett mansion she had once overheard, all connecting in a vivid, painful tapestry that illuminated just how close she had always been to danger without knowing it. That night, as they pieced together the final segments of the Harper research, a sudden alert from Alexander's private security system flashed across his laptop screen, showing an unmarked vehicle parked near Evelyn's modest apartment, and both of them froze, the silence between them thick with unspoken fear and adrenaline. "They've found you," Alexander said quietly, standing and grabbing his coat, his mind racing through contingencies, while Evelyn felt the first real tremor of panic in months, her fingers brushing over the necklace as if it could protect her, a talisman from her parents' legacy. Within minutes, they were in Alexander's car, moving through the city streets with precision. Yet even as they drove, Alexander's thoughts returned to his childhood, recalling the conversations with his father about the Harper project and the cryptic warnings to keep it safe, and realizing that Evelyn's survival was now directly tied not just to her parents' past, but to the present danger that had never truly dissipated. As they reached a safe house on the outskirts of the city, Evelyn finally spoke, her voice tight but determined. "Why me? Why did they take such an interest in a girl?" Alexander's gaze softened, and he replied, "Not just a girl, Evelyn. You're the only one who carries the link to what your parents created, the only one who can finish it, planting both a spark of responsibility and a curiosity that tugged at her heart, binding her to the mission even as fear threatened to overwhelm her." Over the next few hours, they sifted through every document, connecting names, dates, and hidden transactions, noticing patterns of greed, betrayal, and ambition, each discovery layered with foreshadowing that the same forces that had destroyed her parents' lives were still active, still watching, still waiting for a misstep. Late into the night, as Evelyn rested briefly in the safe house, Alexander reviewed the final files one last time, his mind plotting the next move while she slept, unaware that their connection, built on trust and curiosity, had become stronger than fear, and that the handsome billionaire and the poor orphan forced from her home were now entwined in a game of power, secrets, and survival that would lead them inexorably toward the ultimate revelation of her parents' legacy and the life-altering truth that had been waiting for her all along. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of the safe house, casting golden stripes across the room where Evelyn Harper sat at a small desk, the silver necklace with the engraved L glinting in the light as she traced its curves, her mind racing with the puzzle pieces Alexander had revealed over the past weeks. Outside, the city stirred unaware, but inside, a quiet storm of anticipation and revelation had taken hold. For today would mark the moment the threads of her past, present, and future would finally converge. Alexander entered the room, his expression a mixture of calm determination and something softer, almost protective, and said, "Evelyn, it's time," prompting her to look up, her pulse quickening, aware that the culmination of everything she had learned and endured was at hand. They moved to the Laurent Corporation headquarters, a sleek tower that stretched into the sky, its glass reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of power and promise. And inside, Alexander guided her to a private chamber where the final files and prototypes of her parents' Harper project had been preserved in secret, hidden from the world that had tried to steal it decades before. Evelyn gasped as she recognized the delicate medical devices, intricate schematics, and journals meticulously kept by Daniel and Rachel Harper, each page a testament to brilliance, dedication, and the love that had sustained her parents even in the face of relentless threats. Her fingers trembled over the notes as Alexander spoke gently. "Your parents weren't just scientists. They were visionaries who wanted to change lives, and you, Evelyn, carry the key to finishing what they started." Flashbacks surged through her mind. Daniel teaching her to carefully assemble small prototypes, Rachel whispering late at night about ethics and responsibility, the days in the orphanage and the cold smiles of the Bennetts, and the night she had been forced out into the streets, each memory now connecting like stars, forming a constellation that revealed the path she was always meant to follow. Alexander reached out and took her hand, not in a gesture of command, but of solidarity, saying softly, "You've been through more than anyone should, but now, together, we can make this right." And for the first time, Evelyn felt the fear, betrayal, and loneliness that had defined her life transform into purpose, courage, and hope. The silver pendant glimmered between them, a symbol of her parents' love and the legacy that had been preserved against all odds. And Evelyn understood that the hardships, the betrayals, and the years of searching had led her here not to a life dictated by wealth or chance, but to one she could claim herself. Outside, the city buzzed on, indifferent to the quiet revolution unfolding in that room, yet inside, the girl who had been a poor orphan, forced out of her home, now stood with a man whose heart and mind had been touched by her story, ready to harness her parents' legacy, confront the shadowy forces that had once threatened her, and embrace a life transformed by courage, truth, and the promise that her destiny was hers to define. Alexander smiled, a rare softness in his usually controlled demeanor, and Evelyn returned the smile, the necklace resting proudly against her chest. And together they stepped forward into a world where past pain became the foundation for a future brimming with possibility, love, and the unshakable certainty that she would never again be powerless.